Greetings, fellow bookworm. Jean-Claude here for a review of The Auctioneer by Joan Samson. So I read this book last week, and I gotta say I really enjoyed this book. It might be one of my favorite books that I've ever read, actually. I heard of this book by the Paperbacks from Hell book by Grady Hendrix. So as I said, it might be one of the best books I've read so far. Maybe out there in the top 5. Maybe I should do a top 5 video someday. Actually, that could be a good idea. So this story is taking place in a small village, American village. I don't remember the name of the village nor the state where this story is taking place, and I feel like it's not that important because one thing that I got from the book is that location doesn't really matter. It's more the characters. Maybe I'm wrong, maybe I misinterpreted something, but that's actually the feeling that I got by reading the book, that because throughout the book, like, the author is hinting at they should just leave, the land behind, uh, but in the character's mind, the land is what's more the most important thing, but the author throughout is kind of suggesting that the land is not that important. So that's why I think the location doesn't really matter. I might be wrong though, and I'm sorry if it was important actually. So this auctioneer comes into that small town to do auctions, for the benefits of police and fire and the firefighters, so they can have better equipment and hire more staff and stuff like that. So at first, the auctions are just these things that just happens, and that people are just giving away their stuff. They're not really giving away stuff because they're getting some money out of this, but we don't know if they got the right value or anything, if they got enough money out of the sales. Maybe they're not, but at first it's all done in a cordial way, so everybody's just giving their stuff freely. But as time goes, they feel obligated to give up their things, and weird accident starts happening. If you don't give what the auctioneer is asking you to give, you're gonna have a weird accident, so they have to. So this tensions builds over time, of how scared our main characters are, because we're following this small family, farmer family. So there are like 4 different people. You have the father, the mother, their daughter, and the grandmother, that is whom is the mother of the father. So we're following this family, as I said, and we're mainly seeing how they come to be dispossessed of all their possessions. And as I mentioned earlier, throughout the book, there are all these hints that they just should leave and abandon their land, but the father never wants to give up his land. So all these different things are happening mainly because of that, and that they don't want to get dispossessed of their possession, and their biggest possessions being land. They value land almost more than he values his own life. In a way, that's mainly why all these things are happening. I won't go too far into the story because I don't want to spoil anything, but I really enjoyed this book mainly because it's straight to the point. It's a short book that doesn't get lost in other aspect of the story, that but she really gets her point across. There's a lot of different topics being covered in the book, but I feel like it was done in such a way that it's really good. It was so an amazing read. It's a slow paced book at the start. The first 50 pages is just slowly building up, but once that tension builds up, around page 50, as I said, it's just never ends. And I had to finish reading, like, it's a real page turner just because of that tension that builds up, and that something horrible is going to happen. You don't know what, you don't know when it's gonna happen, but you sure know that, yeah, it's gonna it's gonna break eventually. All this tension cannot, continue on like this. It has to break sometime. And when it does break, when it ends, the story is just really good. I don't really fully understand the ending. That being said, though, it's one that's really great, that fits the tone of the book, actually. So I got mainly 3 topics out of the book. First one is gentrification, mainly because, that village is going to be not really a town, but is going to get bigger and bigger. That's what the auctioneer wants, to have more people inside this small village, so densify this village essentially. So he's trying to push people out to build more houses on other people's land. It's clear in the author's mind that this is a bad thing because it kills agriculture. The second one is kind of a cult leader aspect to the auctioneer. Not only cult leader, but like dictator almost, but on a smaller scale than a dictator, but on a bigger scale than a cult leader, so somewhere in the between. The auctioneer for me is kind of a cult leader, as I said, mainly because he's trying to separate all the villagers by turning them on each other. This is something in an authoritarian society that they do also. So that's why, it's kind of both these things. It's on a larger scale than a cult, as I said, but on a smaller scale than a dictatorship or authoritarian society, actually. Lastly, and not least, this is kind of the main topic of the book, is change and how you cannot stop change. You can delay change, but you can never really stop it. As the saying goes, the only constant is change. I really felt it in here because if it's not this auctioneer, change is going to come in another form or something like this. And this is where the ending could come into play with all of that, with change. So I don't want to spoil the end, so I'm just gonna stop right here. I really enjoyed this book. As I said, it might not be my favorite book yet, but it's definitely in a top 5. It's not your typical horror story, there's no supernatural horror, there's no body horror, there's no gore. It's more of a thriller, quote unquote, because there's no murders and police investigation, but it's has so many tension built into the book, in the story. It's just that feeling that something bad is gonna happen, and when it does, you're not even relieved because of how bad things are, essentially. So it's not your typical horror. I wouldn't put it, typical horror book, but it's one that definitely stands out, and it's an incredible book, actually. It's very close to reality. These things could happen. Maybe not only could happen, but I feel like already did happen to somebody somewhere. It's a really good story, one that I really enjoyed, and I cannot recommend that book enough. It's a masterpiece in my mind. It's just so good. It's a perfect book. In my mind, it's flawless, just because even though the start is rather slow, it's only 50 pages, and you just get to know the characters a bit better, and once the stuff starts happening, it never lets go, and it's really a good story, actually. That's it for this review. On with next week's random pick. So on with next week's random pick. So I've got all the book title in here. Let's bring all that in the skull. Let's just randomize the whole thing. Alright, and it's George R.R. Martin, Fever Dream. I can't wait to read Fever Dream by George R.R. Martin. This is going to be my second book that I read from him. First one was Song of Ice and Fire. I didn't particularly connected with this book, mainly because I think that fantasy isn't for me, so I can't wait to see what he has in store horror-wise. But yeah, I can't wait to see for this book. I'm not really into vampires usually. I just wish that the vampires are gory. I don't like the Anne Rice vampires, if I could categorize the vampires in a way. Mainly because they're too sophisticated in my mind. Vampires are beasts that just wants to feed. Think 30 Days of Night. If you've read the comic books, the movie was decent. Comic books were good. If you've ever read the comic books, you know that's kind of the vampires that I'm looking for. I hope that this is the case in this book and not really Anne Rice's vampires, but we'll see. Thank you guys for watching. Keep on reading. Stay safe. Stay respectful to one another. And I'll see you next time.